Hello, we are the team working on guidelines for the effective capture and use of stormwater for infiltration and irrigation in California, and we've been working with the Natural Resources Defense Council on our project. So to start off by introducing ourselves, my name is Margaret. I'm joined presenting by Eric and James, and this is the rest of our team. And then we've also been working with Mark Gold, who is both our advisor and our client for this project. So to give some background on water in California, you've heard it from a few groups, but as climate change continues to affect our country and the state of California specifically, our water scarcity issues are only going to worsen and become a greater issue for the state. So a way that we can lessen the effect of these issues is through the use of other underutilized resources such as stormwater. Stormwater is free, it comes from the sky, but right now it is incredibly underutilized because there's no standardized framework for the use of this resource. Across the state, there are 9 different regional boards which control the use of the stormwater, and they have varying levels of regulation around its use. For example, in LA County, where we reside, the regulations for it are extremely strict, making it incredibly difficult to utilize, but in some areas there's no framework whatsoever. So the goal of our project has been to standardize this framework across the state and make it much easier to utilize stormwater, and through the impact of that, up climate resilience overall, and increase local water usage. So the research question that has been guiding our project is, how can we best utilize collected stormwater in California and ensure that there are guidelines regulating its use? So we've gone about this with a couple of different methods, the first being subdividing our team into 4 different sub-teams, which have been working on different aspects of our project, which we'll touch on throughout the presentation. We've also spoken with experts from across the country, some from EPA Washington, others from the Midwest, and some right from California with the State Water Resources Control Board, and then also using existing legislation, guidelines, and other successful projects as the framework for how we can be creating these regulations and guidelines for the use of stormwater. The overall goal of our project has been to output the different aspects that each of the sub-teams has been working on, including different documents, which we'll touch on in a second, as well as a bill called AB 638. So to get a little bit more into what our sub-teams have been working on. First, our legislation team has been working with Celeste Rodriguez to draft AB 638. This bill's goal is to standardize the usage of stormwater through guidelines across the state as a whole. This is going to make it much easier to utilize this underutilized resource right now. So what we have been doing as team members working on this kind of aspect of the project is doing lots of the behind the scenes work, drafting up the guidelines that they're going to need to base this bill off of, and then also gaining support for the bill across the state from different NGOs and governmental groups. Some really exciting news is that this bill just passed through the Assembly and is moving on to the Senate. If you know anything about legislation in California, that is a huge accomplishment, and we're really, really excited that it should be finalized by September.
All right, so another key component of our report, on top of AB 638, has been to create our own guidelines for stormwater reuse for irrigation in urban areas. So you might think like golf courses, cemeteries, or public parks. As a reminder, one of the main reasons that this project exists in the first place is because in LA County, they currently have extremely excessive guidelines to the extent that stormwater that's being used for irrigation is being held to the same standards as drinking water. And what this has done is this has killed off pretty much all or many of the ongoing projects that are happening, leaving millions of dollars in stranded assets, as well as prevented future projects from being proposed. In addition to this, as Margaret mentioned, there is no consistent guidance at the state, which is why LA County could do this in the first place. And so what our group has done is we've created these 2 sort of matching reports to hope to directly fix, or at least help fix, these issues at both the state and the county level. Our first report is going to the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, and this has sort of alternative, more appropriate standards and practices. And also, so this is sort of a shorter report that could actually be directly implemented like today into the existing guidelines. Our second report is going to the California State Water Resources Control Board, which is a more comprehensive framework. And the goal for this is to ensure consistency across the entire state. And something also to note is that this guidance is actually what the state will need to do to comply with AB 638. So we're essentially doing a lot of their work for them. So our reports were primarily based off of a few documents. The first 2 were California State Title 22 and EPA 2012 federal guidelines, which both had suggestions for the use of recycled wastewater for irrigation. And we also found that Australia had some very solid guidelines, specifically for stormwater. And so based on these documents, what we sort of done in our reports is we have created sort of recommendations for these potentially large-scale stormwater capture systems in order to reduce public health risks by lowering exposure to pathogens. Some examples of this are recommendations for treatment, recommendations for backflow or cross-contamination prevention. There's monitoring, and there's a whole bunch more that I won't get into now, but feel free to ask questions at the end. So what is the current status of these reports? We've actually currently already sent them to both the LA County and the State Water Resources Control Board and received feedback from the state. And they're pretty much finalized by now, and we're hoping that they can get implemented as soon as possible.
All right, the next part of our project focuses on the use of stormwater for infiltration. And infiltration is when we take this collected stormwater runoff and we're putting it down into groundwater, filtering it through the soil to be stored. Groundwater is a crucial water resource in California. It's a naturally occurring water resource, but unfortunately in California, we've overdrafted and overused this resource. So now we need to turn to stormwater infiltration as a solution to this to start refilling and replenishing these depleted wells across the state. A concern of stormwater is it can be very polluted, as when it goes across surfaces, it takes the contaminants on those surfaces. So the first part of our guidelines was an assessment of whether the contaminants in stormwater could also be a contaminant to groundwater. So we did this based on if the contaminant was toxic, if it's abundant in stormwater, if it's immobile in soils and or persistent in soils. We found that heavy metals, organic contaminants, or nutrients pose the most risk. In our report, we include a recommendation to use nature-based solutions, or NBS. And a nature-based solution is one that takes advantage of soil's natural hydrology to remove pollutants, while also providing a community benefit, such as reduce urban heat island, increase green space, or flood control. And here's some California examples of projects like these on the screen. In our report, we also include guidance on the necessary distance between the site of infiltration and the depth of groundwater, setbacks from the project itself and drinking water wells, as well as guidance on how to size these projects and guidance on assessing the soil type at the project site, and then potentially modifying the soil type to increase its ability to remove pollutants. One of our biggest findings from our project was that there's absolutely zero groundwater quality monitoring data for projects like these. Some projects have been infiltrating stormwater for over 60 years, and that's thousands of acre feet per year. We have no idea how this has impacted the quality of groundwater. So moving forward, we need to close this gap to make sure that we're not affecting public health or deteriorating groundwater quality across the state. And finally, as we leave today, we want you to know that our group will have closed this gap in state legislation with AB 638, and this will allow stormwater to no longer be a wasted resource, but instead provide local water supplies and support urban green spaces. Additionally, our reports on infiltration and irrigation can and should be adopted by the State Water Resources Control Board to enhance water supplies and enhance climate resiliency for California's future. Thank you.
So I'll open up to questions, but I do want to point out, just for those of you who really aren't aware of the full experience of working with the California legislature, attempting to get a bill seen and passed and shepherded through is really a perfect opportunity to go straight through the looking glass into Wonderland, or maybe a better version, sort of more modern, is into the upside down. It is a absolutely labyrinthine, completely just challenging process to do, and the fact that students have gotten a bill to the point that it's, let alone being looked at by the Assembly, but has passed through the California Assembly, is just staggering and really warrants a lot of congratulations for that. So with that note, though, I'd like to open for questions about this approach. And yes, please.
Just wondering how were you able to isolate those top three? I think you said contaminants, heavy metals, so on. There were top three. How were you able to isolate that those were contributing factors to contaminants?
Like James said, we looked at whether contaminants were toxic, so whether they could pose public health risks, and if they were abundant in the stormwater. So contaminants that had higher concentrations in stormwater were less likely to be filtered out of the soil. And then also we looked at the mobility of those contaminants in soil. So what were the processes that were moved to the contaminants and how effective were they? based on normal concentrations in stormwater. And then we also looked at how persistent they were in soil. And so that's how we came to the conclusion of heavy metals, organic contaminants, and nutrients, because they satisfied all of those 4 requirements. And yeah, we concluded that they could have a potential to impact groundwater quality.
I'm curious what the barriers have been to improving our management of stormwater in the past, because we've been in a drought on and off for the last couple of decades. So, you know, in your estimation, why is it taking to 2025 to do that? And what does that tell you about the barriers to getting this implemented at the state levels?
I think I can take this, and I can think of 2 main reasons to start off with. As we talked about, stormwater has been seen in the public eye as a dirty water resource. And in that sense, people haven't wanted to use it. People have been scared to use it because of potential risk of pathogens. And then the second reason is, this is straight from the State Water Resources Control Board, is that they've kind of put this off, even though they want to do it, because they focused on recycling toilet water instead of stormwater, because that infrastructure is already in place. So rather than kind of start a new subject, they're going to what they already have available. Those are 2 reasons for that.
Just a quick question. So you walk around the west side of LA, and when you see new houses going in, you oftentimes see little, what I assume are sort of little local infiltration basins, water filtration basins, you know, in the front yard of the house. In every house I look at, I see it now. I'm assuming that's what those are for. And if so, can you give us a sense of how those sort of individual, very small scale basins function or contribute to this problem compared to, you know, to larger infrastructure?
Well, so that kind of project would be described as rainwater harvesting when it's happening at like a local house on site. And because it's on site, you have a much lower risk for contaminants. And so we're not as concerned about that. But when we're looking at a large scale in a city, a municipality, it has a lot more pollution. It's running on surfaces, sidewalks, and streets that are contaminated. And so that's a key difference. And so if you are doing that at your house, you're contributing you're not relying on other potable water, so that's a great offset. But as a statewide impact, we need this to be at the larger scale, and that takes mitigation of pollution.
I think also those help a little bit more with water quality rather than water quantity concerns. So it just helps like runoff from cities going through that, removing pollutants in general so they don't make it to the surface waters. But I don't think it's as helpful in supplying the overdrafted groundwater basins.
Thank you.